Testing, testing. Can everyone hear me? Thank you. I want you to note that you're all set up as moderators, but you're not all moderating. The host could not attend this meeting, and she wanted to have this all set up. So if you want to interact, please use the chat box. And we'll get started in a couple more minutes. Hi, Katie. Hi, Glenn. Hi, Vanessa. And hi, Mr. or Mrs. Roberts. Can anyone else hear me? Testing, testing. Can anyone hear me? Okay, Glenn, good. Can you hear me, though? You don't need to see me. If you'll please mute and turn your sound off, because I am hearing someone typing. Well, let's go ahead and get started. If anyone else joins us, we'll just welcome them. This was generated because, of course, this is going to be a distraction with the sound. If everyone can please mute their sound. So if that means hitting the talk button on the above left and turning it off, clicking it off so that we don't hear dogs barking and typing, etc. Thank you. Okay, well, this started because so many students always use first person, and quite honestly, in writing papers, sometimes it's hard not to use the editorial we. So I did a little bit of research on this, and I used the APA blog. In fact, I'm going to turn the video off. That way I'm not so distracted also. So let's go ahead. Excuse me. So often you're going to get the question, can you use the first person in your academic essay? It's probably, please turn your talk button off. Let me type that in there. Please ensure the talk button is off. So, you often hear this question, and most professors say, absolutely no, you can't use first person. However, I did a little bit of research into this, and this is not to defy what professors want, but it's just to get a little bit more information out here. So interestingly enough, the APA manual actually recommends the use of first person to avoid ambiguity. Now, that is a definite change from the 5th edition. And read it carefully, because this doesn't mean they want I statements throughout there. But when it makes the writing clearer, it may be appropriate to use first person, but not I statements. And let's go ahead and talk about that a little. Well, first of all, for anyone who has the manual, I would go ahead and go to page 69 and 70 and highlight that. And they say that nowadays authors sometimes use third person simply because it sounds more objective. Authors will often use the phrase "the authors" as a stand-in for I or we. And I get confused when excuse me. The weather is getting the better of me. Snow and then sunshine and snow and then sunshine. But okay, when I'm reading an essay, whether it's a bachelor's level or a master's level or a dissertation, it's very confusing when you talk about the authors. Which authors are you referring to? So in this example, it says Smith and Jones and Drew noted there is no correlation between television viewing time and calorie intake. The authors replicated the finding with 3 experiments. Well, which authors? Was it the authors who are writing the paper? Or was it Smith and Jones? Or was it Drew? Or was it Smith, Jones, and Drew? Or, you just get confused by this. So here's where that ambiguity comes in, and you want to write clearly so to avoid that. And here it says, who does this refer to? Is it Smith and Jones and Drew? So to write it more clearly, you could write, as Smith and Jones and Drew noted, there is no correlation between television viewing time and calorie intake. We, meaning, see, it's totally different. We replicated this finding with 3 experiments. Well, I'm assuming, again, that the we refers to the authors of the research, but even then, I'm really not clear on that. I would encourage this student to state, like, for example, Swanson theory and appropriate, but APA is saying it is okay to do this. One of the things that we want to do is to avoid anthropomorphism, and it just cracks me up, but sometimes I'm not the best one to figure it out. We know that findings can't tell a story, data can't report, an experiment cannot demonstrate, but the researchers can. And once again, APA is saying in this case it may be appropriate to use the word we or I. However, in the dissertation that I was just reviewing, I changed all of those I statements, and I'll tell you why in the future here. But what I'm saying is that APA stands behind the fact that if you're being more clear and avoiding anthropomorphism, it would be acceptable to use I or we. So sometimes it's very confusing, and I know it's very easy for especially bachelor level and master level students to use the editorial we. We, they throw that in there, and every time I see it, I say, well, who's we? Who is we? APA says that is okay, although I would err on the side of going towards being more specific. As specific as you can be would be the most appropriate, but this APA 6th edition does support it. It says on page 70, and you can, earmark this, that we is an appropriate and useful reverent. You could simply rewrite the sentence and say, as psychologists, we categorize anxiety. For example, I see a lot of talking about our society or the United States, and people will talk about we. But maybe they should say, in the United States, we. In the state of Colorado, we. That makes it clearer. So once again, although APA permits it, I would encourage everyone, whether faculty or student, to be as specific as possible in your writing. So when can you use I or we? Well, that depends. And that clarity, and you don't need to write a lot of I statements. If you can remember back to your first writing, back in what, first, second grade, you said, I saw the dog. I plan on, well, you probably didn't say that. Or do you sometimes see a lot, A-L-L-O-T? Make certain that every word means exactly what you intend it to mean. I found, for example, I was reading this dissertation, and when you're writing, and this is at all levels, when you're writing, you know exactly what you're supposed to say. It's kind of like communication, where you're sending the message you want to say, but what they hear or what they read might not be exactly what they want to say. So, for example, I was reviewing a dissertation, and they're talking about a high school in Georgia, and they kept referring to the high school, and etc. It was just very vague, and I'm coaching her as to be more specific. So that is a really good thing, Instead of using words like I or we, describe who that is. Is it the researcher, etc.? So I got this off the APA blog, and I haven't properly cited my sources, so don't ding me on that. But there's a quote on there. Let me just see. Yes. But hang on to that thought. There's a caveat that's going to save you here. Hang on to that thought. The dissertation editor said, I was really happy to see the use of first person come out of the closet. When I talk to students about using the first person, I tell them to be conservative in their use. That's exactly it. If they need to provide a real-world example of a motivational theory, and perhaps it's an incident where they were motivating someone, they can talk about it in first person, and maybe in one sentence they can say, I did something, but don't continually make I statements. Respect early traditions rather than the APA requirements. And those traditions stand very strong. We need that dry, clear writing. I guess the whole thing to remember is that we are trying to be as clear as possible in academic writing. And that's the key, is the clarity. So here, Dennis said to the last post, he said, thanks for it. And he said, as a psychology writing instructor, these are one of those subjects that I have to help students to unlearn what they've learned. And he went on to say, I'm happy that the first person has come out of the closet. And in the 5th edition, explicitly, it said you need to avoid I and we. But then he brought up some other things here. So, but here I'm going to come up, and we're getting close to that caveat that's going to save you here. The abstract section, and this is clearly in the APA manual, does not mention the use of first or third person. This leaves the choice to the author, working within any other necessary guidelines. Of course, teachers' instructions, publishers' preferences, and you know, at this point I'm going to say, if all of us have been a parent at some time, or if you have watched a niece or a nephew, or if you've ever babysat, or you've ever interacted with a child, and I'm just using this as an example, sometimes, or you've been the recipient, sometimes that parent will just say, look, you can't go because I said so. Well, sometimes it boils down to that. Sometimes the school will have guidelines that say specifically you may not use first or third person. Sometimes you may have a very stringent professor who says you may not use first person. I think all of us have experienced the student who rightfully says this, that says, well, and all the professor allowed me to do it. Well, this is your caveat, and you're out. There are guidelines, and at Ashford University, for example, we have faculty guidance, instructor guidance, and in there we might be able to, throw in there that please do not use first or third person. I am going to show you a few tricks just in case you're one of those that says absolutely not. I have been one of those who has said absolutely not, but I am considering the assignment. As someone just mentioned, I believe it was Katie, who said, sometimes there are reflective assignments, or they give real-world examples that may allow for an occasional I or we. So for the students in there who want to use an I or a we, you could always nicely tell your instructor that you could make certain that every word means exactly what you intended to mean, and on page 68 in the APA manual it discusses that. So that's the final word. And if the instructor comes back and says, well, who is we in this sentence? For the example that I just provided. So before I go on how to avoid it, are there any questions? Yes, I feel or I believe I do not encourage that, especially when it's based on fact. All of the essays should be based on research, even if that research is only the textbook. Perhaps the authors believed it. Okay, so let me go ahead and I will take questions at the end. So this is from an older presentation that I created, but I thought this was appropriate to pull into this one too. And this is how to avoid writing in first person. Oftentimes I have that paper that's just filled with first person. And here's a poor example. As I trained, I thought about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how I could implement this motivational theory. Well, this is, I suppose, appropriate for a casual writing, but not academic, not for a good, clear A paper. And this is rewritten, but maybe it's not perfect. But here is an example. Taking the leadership of a new organization, motivational theories could be considered. One theory was Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how this theory could be implemented. Sounds about the same thing as this one, but it doesn't use one single I statement. It's not easy to rewrite. It's not. And so, but here are some helpful sites. The top one is from OWL. I did check the link. It is a good link. But the other one is How to Avoid Writing in First Person. This is from I assume a gentleman. I shouldn't assume with my name. Lee Bowman, who did this. And there's some very good thoughts on it and some examples. It's important to note that while the avoidance of I has long been part of the academic tradition, that nowadays it's sometimes acceptable. And even in my class, it may be acceptable. It won't be acceptable if it's riddled with I statements, that's for sure. So you may encounter students in here. I want you to remember that this is where we are individuals. And sometimes we have a different understanding of APA, just as you do. Exactly. We're, especially at the master's level, we don't know if they may want to pursue further academic degrees, or it just improves your writing. If I were to look at a statement like this in a professional writing in a business, I wouldn't approve it. So the bottom line is, don't fight it. You know, some of us are real sticklers, and remember, it's part of the growing. We're challenging you to grow, and perhaps maybe the only thing that you will learn in the whole class might be how to avoid writing in first person. So here's some examples. One way is to let the assignment speak for itself. For example, I demonstrated a lack of understanding on the topic of proper academic writing. Could be written as a lack of understanding on the topic created an error in the presentation. I interpreted the results. Well, instead of you, maybe why don't you say who actually read this? And one of the things I also want to point out at this point right here, I see, and maybe this really doesn't tie in, but where it says Swanson and Kreitz, I will often see as stated in Swanson and Kreitz. Well, you don't always need that introductory phrase. I can't remember, I think Vanessa and I, we've talked about this before. It's perfectly fine to start off with Swanson and Kreitz stated, presented, delivered, you know, make them the noun of the statement. Another way to avoid the first person is to use passive voice construction. Sometimes this will be, you'll be dinged on this for using passive voice, but occasional passive voice is acceptable. Sometimes if you're not allowed to use first or third person, well then you really have to. switch to passive voice. That's very difficult. When here you say, we administered the questionnaire, change that to the questionnaire was administered. I surveyed the literature was surveyed. I took a sample was taken. So when in doubt on whether to use first person, ask your instructor. Don't be afraid to ask. I strongly encourage students to, instead of waiting until the last minute to write their paper, let's say the paper is due on Sunday night. Typically, I would say, and this is not based on any statistical information, but based on my own history, I would start the paper that evening, probably after dinner if it was due that night. But I found that led me down a bad path because I didn't have time to do the research, etc. So if the paper was due on Sunday, you're awake then, look at the next assignment. I use that next day or the time right after I submitted the assignment to look at the next assignment. If it's kind of reflective in nature, why don't you ask your instructor? How many of you as instructors get questions at about 9 o'clock on the date that it's due? When you could have answered those questions easily, the day earlier in the week. I would love to see a move to that. So there's my references, and I will take questions in just for a moment, but I do want to tell you about the coming attractions. So far this week, this month, we had citing those pesky electronic resources, and then today we talked about I and we and how there's changes in APA. Next week there's going to be assembling engaging literature reviews. That should be very interesting because Diane Pennington, who is here at Ashford also, she used to be a librarian or is still a librarian, so she has a whole different twist than I do to APA and literature reviews, and nicely and correctly. So as you know, and there's just this information here, as you know, I sent this to anyone who was invited to this. If you want these, what I did was I'm distracted again. I uploaded these as pictures into my classroom, and I believe I have a couple of students in here, and I'm so glad to see them. Kimberly, I think you're one of my students. And T.M. Roberts, I'm not sure. Maybe you are. You might want to self-identify. Robert, are you a faculty or a student? Well, this was a nice little half-hour session. It is being recorded, so I will be able to give you an archive probably later in this week because I have to figure it out. Still on the learning curve there. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I love that there's students in here. They're hearing some of our teacher secrets too. I don't think they're secrets. The bottom line is that our goal is to make you better writers. Not only to learn the topic, but to present the information well. So would any of you like to add to this? Do you have any questions? I know I've been working the last couple of days with Kimberly, And I think we're getting to a point where she understands, and I think I'm relaying the message clearly now. So every time it should be a little bit better. Each time that you submit a DQ or an essay, if you improved a little bit, that's a good thing. Any questions? Any comments? Vanessa, can you upload those in my APA Dropbox? Yes, are they, does everyone in here who is a faculty member have access to the APA Dropbox? For those of you that are students, that all depends on the assignment, and it also depends on the instructor and the guidance for the assignment. So I hate to be so vague, but it really depends on the assignment. Faculty in here, do you have any other advice? He just asked, should we use personal reflection when doing an essay? One of the other things I want to mention for you that are students and faculty, and one that's open to faculty and students, it's called APA and Beyond. If you would like to be invited to those groups, please just type in your email or email me your address, and I will invite you to those groups. We will, if you have a question, I mean, we're not there. Can you explain what you mean? Can we discuss how individuals develop the use of APA? How, I'm not clear. I believe you have the ability to take the mic, sure. That's true. APA, academic writing. APA is merely the formatting. Academic writing is more the style, and that's developed over time. Unfortunately, writing can also be used in MLA or Chicago or whatever. Academic writing to me is a style in and of itself, a clarity. That's a deep topic. Would you like to present on that? To me, APA is like the uniform that you wear versus the street clothes. Yes. I have a whole presentation on why APA, why bills typically use APA versus MLA. I created it because I worked for a business college, a small one, that used MLA. Exactly. And we tend, and I make this a little bit like the Bible. I have with the undergraduate studies, general education, undergraduate studies, general education courses. Anyway, I draw an analogy to the Bible. Sometimes I take my iPad to church and I will look to see which verse my pastor is reading from. And then I'll scroll to that version. And as I'm scrolling, I'm looking at how many different versions and interpretations there are to the Bible. Well, much like APA, those are the guidelines and the rules, and there are some interpretations. Each school, for example, interprets those rules differently. They say this is APA way, but this is my way. For example, I've heard of one school that wants page numbers on absolutely all citations, absolutely all, paragraph or page numbers. It's just another interpretation. This has been, and I do want to chat with you about another topic, as you may be able to know. Is that all? No, I'm still right here. It's still in front of me. Well, I am going to bring this to an end. I thank all of you for attending. I appreciate this, and please spread the word because I will answer any specific questions at the end of my sessions. Join the Facebook group. Thank you very much.